Hi, and welcome to Far From Home with me, Mabel Ninan, your host. Our guest today is a fellow Redbud writer. Keisha Lee Louis is a children's author. She's also a PhD student in English at Liberty University, where she studies Imago Dei in African American literature and beyond. Rooted in her faith in Jesus Christ, Keisha writes books that affirm the dignity and worth of every child. Her titles include Wonder in the Waiting, and Use Your Palabras, Jovita. Okay, so I said that right. Use Your Palabras, Jovita, which celebrates journalist and activist Jovita Idar. Her additional book, 21 Reasons Hakeem is My Hero, uplifts resilience, family, and hope for children with Down syndrome, their siblings, and even their friends. Through both scholarship and storytelling, Keisha seeks to illuminate God's image reflected in literature and children's lives. Welcome, Keisha.
Thank you, Mabel. I'm so glad to be here.
I wanted to talk to you about your latest book, which also won an award. Am I right?
Yes, so it was recognized by Kirkus Reviews for indie authors, and it was selected as one of the best picture books of 2025.
Congratulations. That's awesome. That's the book, Use Your Palabras, Jovita, isn't it?
Yes, this one right
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. So before we get into that, I wanted to know a little bit more about you, about your family. I know that you're married to an immigrant. So tell us what it's like, to raise bicultural kids.
Okay. Initially, I think that we were just very fascinated with one another's cultures and all of the differences. And as we grew together, one thing that really helps us is the fact that we're both people of faith, right? And so that helps us to appreciate one another quite a bit. And even like in traveling, I was able to travel with him to Haiti and see his family and help out in communities down in Haiti. And then the same thing, like him being completely immersed in the culture here. So we've had these cross-cultural exchanges for the entirety of our marriage. Of course, there are times when there are miscommunications or misunderstandings, but the Lord has been so good in keeping us and sustaining us and helping us overcome, this idea of culture or culture clash because quite frankly, we are called to be knitted in the culture of Christ. And so that is something that's really helped us over the years.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. What inspired you to become a children's author?
Okay, initially I started when I went to college, I studied writing for adults in my undergrad. I was a dramatic writing major. And I think after I became a mother and an educator, that's when I realized that there are even more opportunities to impact the next generation for good. So that is where I really started contemplating writing children's books. I thought about the impact that children's books had on me, the fact that my parents were very, very supportive in the idea of presenting literature, children's literature with children from all over the world. That was something that was very big in our household growing up. And so that's when I realized that I probably should pivot a little bit and start writing for children as well.
And I know that I mentioned this already in your bio, that your faith influences your writing in many ways. But can you talk a little bit more about that?
Certainly. I think that because my faith is such an integral part of who I am, it really informs this idea of empathy and truly trying to understand where people are coming from, really truly trying to share and shed light on what justice means in action or in love and practice. And so, while not all of my books may mention Jesus Christ specifically, like for example, the Jovita Idar book doesn't necessarily specifically mention him, there is this sense or this feeling even throughout because she too was a woman of faith. you will see one of the illustrations where she's writing on the board, and she's writing um, a verse from First Corinthians 13, which is talking about love. This idea that she had to overcome a lot of challenges through love, and really and truly, the way that she did that, I would think, would be supernaturally, because she was facing a lot more challenges than what some of us face today, even.
Yeah, yeah. And I was just speaking to a friend today, and we were talking about how our faith informs, these values that we share of compassion, kindness, or even advocacy for justice. And I think with your books and your writing, I see that. I mean, I don't know. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but from what I gather from just looking at, your work, that you do have a desire to see that children see themselves as made in God's image, because that's such a basic foundation for, how a child's identity is laid.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think that before you can have any kind of, and I know that this is very big in the culture, this idea of self-esteem, you really truly have to understand that God has made you uniquely. Like, each child must understand that they have been made uniquely. And because God is who he is, we all bear um an image of him, like an aspect of him. He's put certain attributes in each one of us, no matter how much melanin we have, no matter how straight or curly our hair is, no matter, what color our eyes are. He has given us each gifts and attributes that reflect him. And so just really truly empowering children through that understanding, I think it's important in the literature that they read, in the shows that they see, in the toys that they play with, so that they can truly understand and know that they too can do great things in his name.
Yeah, yeah. And I think even your book, the other book that you have about child with Down syndrome, is also doing the same thing, whether you have Down syndrome or you deal with any other challenges, to know that you are created by a loving father and you are made in his image. And so, you can embrace who you are because of that truth.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. I mean, this past summer, my husband and I, we had an amazing opportunity to go to launch the book at the National Down Syndrome Congress convention. And I saw so many children and young people, all the way up through a young adulthood, doing amazing works, even with the extra chromosome. I think that sometimes society wants to limit people where they are for whatever reason. And a lot of them were breaking down barriers and advocating for themselves, showing that they too have a voice. And so I was just so pleased to be a part of that community as an educator, really, truly, coming from that angle, but also the having the importance of seeing children of color in that community as well.
Mm.
So
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's important that even now, when immigrants are being targeted and there is so much fear mongering, there's just this hateful rhetoric against immigrants. It's important that immigrant kids see themselves as being made in the image of God, and that they're loved, they're valued, but also for others to see them that way. And I think that's why one of the reasons I wanted to interview you is for this book that you wrote about Jovita Idar. So tell us more about her and the book.
okay, so Jovita, she was an amazing woman who lived during the early part of last century, and she advocated through advocacy in newspapers, especially using her First Amendment right. Now, the thing about Jovita, she lived on the border of the United States and Texas and Laredo. And so I meant Mexico, right on that border, which had shifted just prior, within her lifetime, within her generation, it had been shifting. And so this idea that they would all of a sudden be expected not to speak a language that they had been speaking for years and years and years, all of a sudden to give up like so many portions of their identity just seems ludicrous to us today. But that was the expectation back then, that even though you're like right on this border, this idea that even though you're Tejano, right, a Mexican who was born in the United States in the indigenous culture, this idea that if you're going to public school, you are going to focus only on learning in English. And so, as an ESOL teacher, or as we call them now, multilingual learners, as a multilingual learning teacher, I found her story fascinating because I also teach journalism, right? So, in my classroom, we have children from all over the world and from many different cultures. And so this idea that she is this woman who was advocating back then for multilingual culture and multilingual education, that's something that sometimes my students take for granted today. So I wanted to highlight her.
Yeah. Um, what kind of challenges did she face? Because I'm sure it was not easy. First of all, she's a woman, and then she's also a Latino. So, how did she advocate, and what pushback did she face?
I think that a lot of people are very familiar with the racism that African Americans faced in this country. But as a Latina person who of Mexican descent, a lot of people did not respect, again, language, culture, history. One of the big things is that she truly advocated that children know about the heroes of their culture, and that's something that I'm very big on as well. Like, I really firmly believe that children should know that people who look like them and who spoke their language did great things. And so, one of the challenges that she faced, particularly with Woodrow Wilson, when things were getting really heated up in her community, and unfortunately, a child was killed, lynched, in fact. And I don't include this in the book, of course. I'm not including that, but she wrote an open letter and explained that we cannot have this type of violence or mob violence, here at the border, just simply because one group thinks that they're superior than another group. And so the Texas Rangers came to destroy her press, her family's press. And the scene that you see here on the cover is indicative of the courage that she had to muster to make sure that they did not destroy the press that day. So that's one of the more famous instances in her life where she found the courage, right, to make sure that the press was not destroyed that day. Unfortunately, later on, the press was destroyed, but they kept writing, they kept publishing, they kept asserting their First Amendment right. And so knowing that she and her family had that type of courage was just amazing. But also, I find it quite sad that not many people know about them. They take for granted this idea of First Amendment right, but these are people who were invoking that for the reasons that it was created to protect freedom of speech, to protect freedom of the press, to protect freedom of religion, right? And so I just admire them so much, and I really wish that there was more literature out there about her family and about her.
Yeah, thank you so much for highlighting, her legacy and her story. How is she relevant today? And why do you think children should be introduced to heroes like Jovita?
Well, I mean, I think that we're seeing a unraveling in real time, even with recent events of reporters being arrested for asserting their First Amendment rights. They were working, but even if they were protesting, if it was a peaceful protest, they're still asserting their First Amendment right. I feel that sometimes, particularly as students are getting older, I think that they take for granted some of the freedoms that we have, or they may not really truly be aware of the freedoms that they have. And I wanted to emphasize, particularly for middle school students, and I know that this is a picture book, right? But I'm a middle school teacher. I'm a middle school journalism teacher who works with children from many different backgrounds. I wanted to emphasize that there's power in the words, right? Because sometimes young people, younger adolescents, they want to go straight to fists. But there's an idea that words have power too. And in fact, more power in order to affect change. And so I feel that it's important for young people to truly understand the power of their words, palabras, so that they can make a change for good or even to advocate for themselves and others.
Yeah, yeah. Um, Thank you for bringing that up. And as an author, how has she influenced you personally, her story?
Well, okay. So I am a firm believer that, again, that children should see themselves in curriculum, right? And the curricula that they are learning. And as a journalism teacher, I knew about Ida B. Wells, right? I grew up with Ida B. Wells and knowing who she is, right? And so I feel the more that I learned about Jovita Idar, the more I realized that my children, my students, needed to know about this woman. They needed to know about other journalists like Wang Chenfu, who he wrote during the Chinese Exclusion Act, right? So I started incorporating more individuals that are just under the radar, right? That people do not know about in the muckraking era and slightly earlier, right? So a lot of the times people know about like or some people know, especially journalists, they'll know about like Ida Tarbell or they'll know about Nellie Bly. But this idea that there are women from many different cultures or men from many different cultures, right, that were affecting change even back then, right, is I think so foundational or important for today's children as well, right? This idea that advocacy wasn't just for one group of people or for a small minority of people, but people from all different backgrounds, if they felt as though their rights were being infringed upon, they had um, they had a tool that they could use in the Constitution with the First Amendment. And so for her and for her family, I just feel as though their courage, knowing and understanding that they advocate. And I'm not gonna romanticize them because I'm sure that in their humanness, they had their shortcomings, their flaws, their failures, their ideas of what was right and wrong in terms of people. I don't know how many other people of color they interacted with in Laredo, but they knew that they had a birthright as image bearers, right? To be treated with dignity. And so I feel like I draw inspiration upon that as well. In the same way that I draw inspiration from Ida B. Wells, I draw from Jovita Idar.
Yeah, thank you. While researching, did you come across any fascinating or interesting facts about Jovita?
I felt like there were so many similarities between her and between Ida B. Wells. Like they both were suffragists. Like, so that means that they wanted to advocate for the right to vote. That was very important to them. I found it fascinating that her father really championed her because in a time when sometimes men may have thought of women children or female children in a different way. Her father really championed her, this idea that he promoted her education. He wanted her to learn. Um, so that was also fascinating to me. He didn't just say, "Okay, your place is over here." He elevated her next to her brothers. So I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah, certainly is. Like you said, especially during that time, for a father to encourage the girl child to to get a good education, to speak her mind is indeed unique. Now, she fought for bicultural education. Why do you see that as important? What are the benefits, even today, of bicultural education in schools?
Okay. Well, first of all, we live in a tapestry. Our country is filled with people from all over the world. And even at the foundation, it was diverse. Like that's what some people don't understand that even before the first Europeans set foot on this land, it was diverse. Because it's so vast, it's so huge, it's so large. Of course, you're going to have people with different cultures, different languages, speaking and interacting in ways that were different. So even at the founding of this country, we have French, we have Spanish, we have English, we have indigenous languages, and then soon afterwards, various West African languages that were coming and different cultures coming. Now, of course, with the last group, it was forced immigration, it was enslavement. But the reality is from that, we are dealing with diversity, right? And since diversity is here, we really should be learning about one another. We really should be trying to understand where each and every one of us is coming from, because if we want to continue to use the symbol of tapestry, if we don't understand like where each thread is coming from, unfortunately, those threads are going to unravel. It is the tapestry will rip. And so I feel that it's important to be educated about people of varying backgrounds if we are supposed to be united as one country.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. I wanted to talk about, the responses that you've received for this book. What are some memorable responses from children that you know of?
Oh my goodness. Okay. So I'm going to start with children at my school and then I'll go a little bit further out. Okay. So with my own students, they were so excited to know that this book had been written, especially since I had taken a year off prior. So last year I wasn't in the classroom. I was writing, I was publishing, I was doing other things. I was beginning my academic work. But the children, when I came back and they realized I had dedicated this story to them, they were amazed that this woman, because we had been learning about her, right? Previous iterations of my class, they had been learning about her. But now this is like a concrete example of, okay, if she can do it, if Miss Lewis could do it, you could do it. And I feel particularly like my eighth graders. I mean, I know that this is a picture book, but my eighth graders were like, oh, okay, a little light bulb went on for them. I really can probably publish or do some work that would benefit others. So that was really good. And then for younger ones, I think it's just been really accessible. It's more like from parents than for the little ones, like this idea of like, okay, this is important to help kids know early on that they have rights too and that they have dignity. And so just hearing that from families has been important.
Yeah. And I love that you included so many Spanish words in there because that's a point. I mean, she fought for bicultural education, Jovita. And I felt like it was only right for you also to include so many Spanish words in the manuscript. Was that
Yeah,
like,
that
how did
seemed
you
natural.
decide to
Yeah,
do
that
that?
seemed natural to me. I mean, it was going with a lot of the flows of conversations that I would hear prior over like 10 years of teaching. The conversation just sort of naturally um came out of that. Like so it's almost poetic, right? The way that it came to me, this idea that she was for bilingual, bicultural education, really multicultural, multilingual education. And so often I have students who are speaking, going back and forth, and sometimes it would be just like one or two words, sometimes it'll be multiple words that would flow back and forth, but it was just very natural for them. And so it seemed natural for me to write the book that way.
Yeah, I really like that part. I learned a few Spanish words from reading your book. It's a wonderful book. Guys, if you want to, if you want to introduce your children to heroes like Jovita Idar, you'll have to check out Keisha Lee Louis's book, Use Your Palabras, Jovita. And before we go, I have one last question for you. You said earlier when we spoke that there are a lot of immigrants in your classroom. And so, what, from your experience, what are some of the challenges that you see them face? And also speak to educators or teachers who are listening. What can they do to help them?
Right. I mean, and this is where some of the sadness of the reality of what's going on right now. So a lot of my children, they are like really just I mean, I think some are aware of what's going on, but they're just like normal young teenagers, right? But then I've also started seeing just like a drought of new coming students. Like, so before I had quite a few students that were newcomers. So now that has stopped. One student who was a newcomer, she moved, she's left. She's no longer in the classroom anymore. She's somewhere in another part of the country. And so I just feel that it's just really, really tragic what's going on. I think that some people did not realize that this is where it was going to go. But you have communities, I mean, if we look at Minneapolis, that are just being completely devastated by what's going on. And I don't know. It's just one of those things where I feel that faith is going to really truly pay a part. I even okay, so let's talk about specifically Haiti and the Haitian immigrants, the Haitian culture, okay? Just recently, their protective stay was about to be completely annihilated, right? But the courts held it back. They said that you cannot do it, right? You cannot just kick these people out and send them to back to a place
Yeah.
of
And
danger,
let me
right?
interrupt there to say that they are here legally and
Right.
they've been given a temporary protective status or the TPS. I don't know exactly what it's called, but I know it's TPS, the
Yes.
temporary stay, and it's completely
Yes.
legal. And
Yes.
by stopping that program, they would have had to go back after having lived here and built their lives and kind
Right.
of, putting down roots. Now they're going to be sent back. And the court stayed that order. Yeah, okay, go
Yes,
on. Yeah, I
absolutely.
just
I'm
wanted to
so
explain
glad
that.
that you
Go ahead.
clarified it. You said it so well. And I do believe that a lot of that came out of prayer in that community because, I have such a close tie to the community. I do believe, and I know for a fact that there were churches up in Minneapolis and other places throughout the country praying specifically for this group of people. So I think I'm a person who believes in the power of prayer. And I was just so happy to see that. Now I just pray that they will because they are legally here. They are asylum seekers, like so many other groups that are asylum seekers. It's just simply not safe for them to go back. It is not safe. And so I feel that having a heart of compassion is where we really need to be. Really truly understanding that heart of compassion, no matter what faith people are in, like having an understanding that a life at risk is not worth it's not you can't live fully if your life is at risk.
Yeah. At the most like basic fundamental level, it's affecting families and children at a
Yes.
very young age, and in fact, of all ages. But it is, I think, especially destructive to children, what they're going through, and the fear. I mean, even to have to live with that kind of fear for adults is difficult. But now children have to also bear that burden. So it is indeed tragic. And like you said, Keisha, we can pray, we can advocate. And thank you for being a good role model for us to do that. So keep using your faith and keep using your palabras to Keisha. Thank you so much for being on Far From Home. It was an honor to have
Well,
you as a guest.
Mabel, it's an honor for me as well. Thank you so much for sharing your platform and for just really truly having this conversation with me. I appreciate you.